Shabbat shalom to you. It's great to see you. Thanks so much for coming. Yeah, all right. Hopefully just I'm sure everything is... Hey, well, you know. Yeah, I'm a West Sider myself. Central Park is exactly where I grew up. But very nice. Some of my dearest friends, as a matter of fact. So Rabbi Lord was a classmate of mine and my wife, actually. So he's our absolute closest. And Rabbi Buchdahl, is one of the most amazing people I've ever had the privilege of meeting. And Rabbi Mo, who is phenomenal. My wife actually was one of the full-time educators for a couple of years while I was finishing up at school. And he was just somebody who went out of his way always to just, be so kind, and it's a remarkable place to say the very least. So we're always very happy to have any central people who are in town. And actually, Rabbi Buchdahl, when she was still a cantorial student, was an intern here. So she is your great grand, something. But just wonderful people. Yeah. Yeah, amazing. Just amazing. Yeah. I was wondering, actually, bonus points to you if you were on the Zoom and you still made it. That's impressive. That is truly impressive.
Shabbat shalom.
And also impressive for you guys who were here in person too. Neil, as it goes, I think there was something of an experiment tonight of what happens when we have a guest speaker, but people in the room itself, and having the TV set up here. There's some things to learn from it, but I think it works. So the picture went
right at the end, like 3 minutes before, I could hear the video, and it was like your time was up.
Interesting.
So he ended it.
I did end it. But the picture itself turned up, but you could still hear me talking?
Yeah. And it said something about 40 minutes. It's being like a free Zoom.
Shouldn't be. Ours was our official account, so unless Zoom is playing games, nothing is out of the ordinary as far as these things go. You should. Well, mostly because there's this weird thing about the mics here where you see right now it kicks in. So it's set to automatically shut off, I guess, when one person stops speaking, and it gives primacy to the first one.
Hello.
And I think we all know we'd rather hear Lauren than me. So if push comes to shove, you'll hear her very clearly and everything, and it might take about a second for this to kick on. For the life of me,
I won't be hitting the stand as much with my guitar.
Oh, so this was the right idea all along.
So I think people on Zoom will be a lot happier.
I suppose that's good. I guess I can take my...
Hello, can you... Oh, that's very loud.
Yeah.
I can't, actually.
Yeah, this is part of our set of challenges.
I can't see Neil's face right now.
That's a shame.
Hi, Neil.
That's a shame.
I moved it a little closer. Was that better? I just can't get any closer because of this.
Hey, Neil, do you think you could talk to Howard and convince him to get us rechargeable batteries? I think it's more economical in the long run in any case. But I'm so grateful that they had these little indicators, right? It turns from green to red with plenty of advanced knowledge, so... Yeah, the soft costs keep getting harder and harder as it goes. But that's okay. That's really all right. So what's it like outside? I haven't seen it in a while. Is this nice? Okay. Yeah, it was freezing this morning. I told Eva to take a jacket. I felt really bad afterwards. She was adamant about not doing it. And I put my fatherly foot down, and I was clearly wrong. So if you don't think I'm going to hear about that later this evening or tomorrow, I promise you I will.
It was a lot warmer in Brooklyn.
It's warmer in Brooklyn?
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
More people. More people.
Yes.
Yeah, well, the other thing is in here, they kick the air conditioning on, so when I walked in before, I meant to tell you to expect to be colder,
Yeah, I still have my winter clothes for here.
That's good. Very good. Okay. All right, very good. Hey, Jack. Hey, Jan. Okay. All right, so let's make sure that you can, if you want to take your mask off. If you
Oh,
want. Yeah.
yes.
Right, I know, you were so comfortable in it that it was even on.
I did.
You know what, I'm just going to do one thing, which is just adjust the mics down ever so slightly, so it's more towards your mouth. Okay, and, okay, can I just say something?
Hello, can you hear me? No, okay, that's a good sign.
Oh. Oh, I was going to call you. Yeah. Sorry, I will call you. Carl. Oh, because they're moving. I didn't think of that. Tomorrow. A tremendous amount of stuff. Okay, well, maybe I'll say something at the end of it just in case, you know. Yeah, it's hard for me to tell people to go and do something on Shabbos, but that is a worthwhile cause, I think, for sure. Thanks for telling me, Carl. Okay, Shabbat Shalom, everybody.
Shabbat shalom.
It's wonderful to see all of you. I know it's unfair that we don't have masks on and you do, but I can see all of your beautiful eyes. And, you know, certainly this is every year when we get to this period of time, and I'll talk a little bit more about it when we get to our sermon, but the transition from Yom HaShoah, which of course ended yesterday, but in our community we've made a common practice lately of having some time before Shabbat to consider. So those that were able to watch the presentation just a little while ago was really quite powerful. And if you weren't able to, we recorded it. I'm happy to send it out. I think we'll probably just do that in any case for next week. But really quite inspiring, quite powerful. But we're going to do as best as we can to now transition into our Shabbat mindset, our Shabbat space, and to celebrate just being together in one form or the other. And as always, it's great to have Cantor Lauren here. We're going to start with our candle lighting, which is on page 120. I'll do the lighting and Cantor will do the blessing.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu le'adlik ner shel Shabbat.
Amen. We'll start our service with Yedid Nefesh, which is on page 128.
Yedid Nefesh Harachaman, Yedid Nefesh Harachaman, Meshoch Avdecha El Retzonecha, Meshoch Avdecha El Retzonecha. Yarutz Avdecha Kemo Hayam, Yishachave El Muhadarecha.
We'll turn now to page 130 as we begin Kabbalat Shabbat together at the top of the page.
Let us sing unto God a new song. Let us sing unto God a new song.
Chunerana Ladonai, Aria Letsuishenu, Ekadma Lefanav Mitoda, Bismirot Narialo, Bismirot Narialo.
We'll turn now to page 131, Shiru Ladonai, beginning in the middle of the page.
I will sing unto God a new song. Sing unto God and we'll all sing along. All the earth a new song unto God. Shiru Ladonai kol haaretz. Shiru
We'll turn now to page 132 at the very bottom of the page, or Zarua, the last Hebrew paragraph.
Or Zarua la tzadik, uleishrei lev simcha. Or Zarua la tzadik, uleishrei lev simcha. Simchu tzadikim Adonai, ve'odu lezecher kodsho. Simchu tzadikim Adonai, ve'odu lezecher kodsho.
We'll turn now to page 134, Zamru Ladonai, beginning at the very top of the page.
Zamru Ladonai bechinor, bechinor vekol zimra. Zamru Ladonai bechinor, bechinor vekol zimra.
We're now on page 135, Romamu, which is the last Hebrew paragraph, right in the middle of the page.
Romemu Adonai Eloheinu ve'yishtachavu lehar kosho. Romemu Adonai Eloheinu ve'yishtachavu lehar kosho. Ki kadosh Adonai Eloheinu romemu. Ki kadosh Adonai Eloheinu romemu. Romemu Adonai Eloheinu ve'yishtachavu lehar kodsho.
We'll turn now to L'chadodi on page 138, and a reminder we'll do the 1st, 2nd, 5th, and 9th paragraphs. For the final paragraph, we will rise and face towards the rear of the room through the doors we walked.
L'chadodi likrat kala pnei Shabbat nekabela. 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 Shamor v'zachor b'dibur echad Hishmianu el hamruchad. Adonai echad u'shemo echad L'shemo tiferet v'tchila. L'chadodi likrat kala pnei Shabbat nekabela. L'chadodi likrat kala pnei Shabbat nekabela. Likrat Shabbat lechu b'necha ki mekor haberacha berosh mikedem nesucha sof maaseh b'machshavat tchila. L'chadodi likrat kala pnei Shabbat nekabela. L'chadodi likrat kala pnei Shabbat nekabela. Hitoreri ki ba'orech u'mi'uri uri shir daberi kevod Adonai alai l'tchila. L'chadodi likrat kala pnei Shabbat nekabela. L'chadodi likrat kala pnei Shabbat nekabela. Poi v'shalom ateret ba'ala גם בשמחה ובצהלה, תוך אמוני עם סגולה, בואי חלה, בואי חלה. לך דודי לקראת כלה, פני שבת נקבלה. לך דודי לקראת כלה, פני שבת נקבלה.
Please be seated. We'll turn now to page 140, beginning at the top of the page.
מזמור שיר ליום השבת, טוב להודו לאדוני, ולזמר לשמך העליון, ולזמר לשמך העליון. מזמור שיר ליום השבת, טוב להודו לאדוני, ולזמר לשמך העליון, ולזמר לשמך העליון. להגיד בבוקר חסדך, באמונתך בלילות. עלי הסור ועלי נבל, עלי היגיון ככינור. מזמור שיר ליום השבת, טוב להודו לאדוני, ולזמר לשמך העליון, ולזמר לשמך העליון. צדיק אתה מה יפרח, כארז בלבנון ישנא, שתולים בבית אדוני, בחצרות אלוהינו יפריחו. עוד ינובו מסבה, דשנים ורעננים יהיו, להגיד כי ישר אדוני צורי, ולא עוולתם.
We'll rise as we turn to page 144 for the Chatzi Kaddish.
יתגדל ויתקדש מרבה,
אמן.
בלמד דברי חירותי וימליך מלכותי, בחייכון וביומכון ובחיי כל בן ישראל, בגלה בגלה ובזמן קריב ויאמרו אמן. יהי שמי רבה מברך, לעולם מעלמיה יתברך. יתברך וישתבח, ויתפאר ויתרומם ויינשא, ויתהדר ויתעלה ויתהלל, שמי קודשה בריחו, לילה מן כל ברכתה ושירתה, תושבחתה ונחמתה, תאמיר על בעלמה, ויאמרו Amen.
Remain standing in body or spirit as we turn to page 146 for the Baruch Hu.
Am I awake? Am I prepared? Are you listening to my prayer? Can you hear my voice? Can you understand? Am I awake? Am I prepared? Marechu et Adonai HaMevorach. Baruch Adonai HaMevorach le'olam va'ed, le'olam va'ed. Yai 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 yai
Please be seated. We'll turn now to page 149, and we'll read together in English at the very top of the page. Praise to you, Adonai our God, from whom the evening flows. Your wisdom sets the way on which time and season glide. Your breath guides the sail of the stars. Creator of the tide of time and light, you guide the current of day into night. As heaven spans to infinity, you set its course for eternity. Praise to you, Adonai our God, from whom the evening flows.
ומעביר יום ומביא לילה, ומבדיל בין יום ובין לילה, אדוני צבאות שמו, אל חי וקיים, תמיד ימלוך עלינו לעולם ועד. ברוך אתה אדוני,
Baruch Hu Shemo.
המריב הרבים.
Amen.
אהבת עולם, בית ישראל, עמך אהבת. תורה ומצוות, חוקים ומשפטים, אותנו למדת. על כן אדוני אלוהינו, בשוכבנו וקומנו, נשיח בחוקיך, ונשמח בדברי תורתך, ובמצוותיך לעולם ועד. כי הם חיינו ואורך ימינו, ובהם נגה יומם ולילה. מאהבתך אל תסיר ממנו לעולמים. ברוך אתה אדוני,
Baruch Hu Shemo.
אוהב עמו ישראל.
Amen.
שמע ישראל, אדוני אלוהינו, אדוני אחד.
Please join me on page 154. ואהבת את אדוני אלוהיך בכל לבבך ובכל נפשך ובכל מאודך, והיו הדברים האלה אשר אנוכי מצווך היום על לבביך, ושיננתם לבניך ודיברת בם בשבתך בביתך ובלכתך בדרך ובשוכבך ובקומך, וקשרתם להיות על ידיך והיו לטוטפות בין עיניך, וכתבתם על מזוזות ביתך ובשעריך, למען תזכרו ועשיתם את כל מצוותי והייתם קדושים לאלוהיכם. אני אדוני אלוהיכם, אשר הוצאתי אתכם מארץ מצרים, להיות לכם לאלוהים. אני אדוני אלוהיכם, אדוני אלוהיכם אמת. Let's read together on the top of page 157. Standing on the parted shores of history, we still believe what we were taught before ever we stood at Sinai's foot, that wherever we go it is eternally Egypt, that there is a better place, a promised land, that the winding way to that promise passes through the wilderness, that there is no way to get from here to there except by joining hands and marching together. As we turn to page 158, Mi Chamocha at the top of the page. Baruch atah Adonai Ga'al Yisrael. We'll turn now to page 161, Hashkibein.
Let there be love and understanding among us. Let peace and friendship be our shelter from life's storm. Let there be love and understanding among us. Let peace and friendship be our shelter from life's storm. Hashkiveinu, Adonai Eloheinu. Hashkiveinu leshalom. Ve'ha'amidenu shomreinu lechayim. Ufros aleinu sukat shlomecha. Hashkiveinu, Adonai Eloheinu. Hashkiveinu leshalom. Let there be love and understanding among us. Let peace and friendship be our shelter from life's storm.
We'll turn now to page 162, Vishamru at the very top of the page. Again, page 162.
Veshamru v'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat, la'asot et ha-Shabbat ledorotam berit olam. Veshamru v'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat, la'asot et ha-Shabbat ledorotam berit olam. Beini uvein bnei Yisrael, oti leolam, oti leolam. Veshamru bnei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat, la'asot et ha-Shabbat ledorotam berit olam. Ki sheshet yamim asa Adonai et hashamayim ve'et haaretz. Veshamru bnei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat, la'asot et ha-Shabbat ledorotam berit olam. Uvayom hashvi shavat v'nafash, shavat v'nafash, shavat v'nafash. Veshamru bnei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat, la'asot et ha-Shabbat ledorotam berit olam.
I'll ask everyone in the room to please rise in body or spirit as we turn to page 164. As always, we'll begin the Amidah together and then from that point continue silently. Please go at your own pace, and when you're finished, you may be seated.
Adonai sefatai tiftach ufi agit ilatecha. that my mouth may declare your praise. Ay, ay, nay, nay, ay, nay, 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 kana, nay, 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 ay, nay, 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 ay, nay, 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 ay, nay, 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 ay, nay, nay, ay, nay, nay, nay. Say shalom imromav uyaseh shalom aleinu le'al kol Yisrael le'al kol Yoshei Tevel Leimeru Amen Leimeru Amen
We turn now to page 371 as we prepare to offer our Misha Berach for this evening. In addition to the names I'll read in a moment, of course, we continue to connect ourselves to the people of Ukraine as well. In our community tonight, we're thinking of Sydney Ross, Roberta Kyle, Rivka Bat Yehuda Babela, Eve Rose, Michoel Ben Chananya, David Kyle Klotman, Bentzi Tepper, Samuel Moskowitz, Devorah Bat Sima, Michael Klinghofer, Norma Paulsak, Amy Cass, Steve Levine, Rivka Bat Rachel, Gail Gambino, Leah Bat Naomi, Gedalia Ben Sylvia, Lorraine Danis, David Dowling, Tzivia Devorah Bat Francis, Myra Peskowitz, Martin Stephen Blake, Chaim Leib, Deborah Block Kroll, Sylvia Orn, Michelle Sawicki, and Francis Kirschman. In addition to the names we've mentioned out loud, for those that are in the room with us tonight, if you'd like to share additional names, we'll start on this side of the room and then move to this side of the room and work from front to back. And if you have names to share, please raise a hand so we acknowledge everyone. We'll join together with the cantor on page 371 as we offer our Mishaberach.
Mishaberach Avotenu Mekor HaBracha Leimotenu. May the source of strength, who bless the ones before us, help us find the courage to make our lives a blessing, and let us say Amen. Mishaberach Imotenu Mekor HaBracha Lavotenu. Bless those in need of healing with refuah shalema, the renewal of body, the renewal of spirit, and let us say Amen.
Shabbat Shalom, everyone. Cantor, you can take a break. I know it's a different side to come off of this week. I'm throwing everybody curveballs. So as I mentioned at the outset, this is a sort of unique period of time in the, I'll say Jewish calendar, but really in more ways the Israeli calendar. So as we all know, we acknowledged yesterday, beginning at sundown on Wednesday and during the day yesterday, and then in our community a little bit before Shabbat services, Yom HaShoah, Holocaust Remembrance Day. And later next week, we will also observe here in our own way, but certainly in Israel, Yom HaZikaron, which is Memorial Day, and then immediately Yom HaAtzmaut, which begins as soon as Yom HaZikaron ends. And we have, again, a rather unique experience here, a rather unique period of time that carries with it some very charged emotions, some complicated emotions, and ones that are actually oftentimes very hard to feel at a distance. So I've been very lucky and privileged in my life that I've been to Israel many times, and as it happened, coincided with the time period in which we are living right now. And it is a unique experience, especially for someone who is non-Israeli. Even with all of my family, all the time that I've spent in Israel, I'm not a citizen, I've not fought in the army, I don't have the same experiences. And so I've always had this experience when I've been there of being somewhat in, right, as a Jewish person and connected deeply to the land of Israel and to the memory of the Shoah, and at the same time of feeling a little bit of distance. I don't know actually, Lauren, whether you had the experience, because I think when you were in Israel for a year, COVID had hit, so you didn't really experience it. But for anybody who's been there, those that were actually with us on our last Israel trip, we were there during this time period, in which, certainly on Yom HaShoah and Yom HaZikaron, the entire country comes to a halt. Sirens are blared. Doesn't matter if you're in the middle of running an errand, whether you're in a car in the middle of the highway. Generally speaking, almost the entire population stops right in its tracks. And so it really, as I said, is a very powerful experience, and yet one that presents a number of complicated, as I said, emotions and considerations. And from the sense that I get, and I'm going to share some words not of my own tonight, but of a growing challenge that I think is facing the Jewish world as a whole, and in particular a growing schism between generations. So what is this really all about? I want to share an article that was written, parts of an article that was written by Rabbi Josh Weinberg. Does that name sound familiar to anybody? If not, I'll have to get Rabbi Weinberg out here. He is the executive director of ARTSA. ARTSA is basically the Zionist wing of the Reform movement in North America. And so Arta, like AIPAC and others, really advocates for the State of Israel and supports positions that are supportive of the State of Israel, and within the sort of unique community that we call the URJ and the Reform movement in North America. And he writes this article on a personal recollection that he had of a conversation that took place about a decade ago with a colleague of his, another North American rabbi who was in Israel, and they were in Israel together. And the other rabbi says to him, and this is a quote from the article, "You know, the problem with the young generation today," which, just by the way, anytime that you start a sentence that way, we've got some work to do, and it also probably is a good indication of dating ourselves. But we all do it from time to time. But he begins, "You know, the problem with the young generation today is that they just don't know what it was like to have been through the Holocaust. And they don't remember the fear leading up to the Six-Day War. And that's why it's hard for these young North American students to connect with Israelis, as so much of our consciousness here comes from the underlying memory and pervasive mentality of the Shoah. And if that's not enough, every aspect of life here was somehow affected by the Six-Day War." So Rabbi Weinberg then rejoins. He comes back and he says, but, and he's asking a rhetorical question here. Is that really what we want? Do we want our young people to feel the Holocaust and the perpetual existential fears? Wasn't Israel created so that we wouldn't have to feel like victims? So that one day we wouldn't live with constant existential fear? Shouldn't we instead be glad that the young generation has grown up in a world that was far enough removed from the Shoah that they only know about it from history, and with an Israel that appears to them more of a Goliath than a David? So he presents this really, again, rhetorical but existential question, which, truth be told, is on the minds of almost anybody who is involved in institutional Jewish life, both here and in Israel, and has been on our minds for some time. And while he identifies a particular generation as having this issue, really, in truth, every generation that followed after the Shoah and every generation that has followed since the Six-Day War, there is something of a reality to this. There is something of a struggle. And having been somebody who has taught many ages in many different places with many different backgrounds, I have seen this myself. When we come to conversations about the Shoah, we come to conversations about Israel, the distance in time and geography from the experiences being described by this other rabbi are significant, and significant to, I won't use the word to overcome, but to reconcile with. So Rabbi Weinberg, of course, he answers his question by saying, yes, I'll acknowledge the point that the other person is making. Right? That generation that he's being referring to, which at this point 10 years ago is now already growing up into their own generation, they don't remember, despite our constant reminders, haranguing, and guilt-tripping. And even though a relatively high percentage of people remember the Holocaust as important for Jewish identity, in his case, he's actually quoting from the most recent Pew report that surveyed this particular question. He says that playing the victim is not going to work if we want young Jews, both diaspora and Israeli, to feel connected to and a sense of identification with Israel, with Zionism, and Jewish peoplehood, despite reports of record-high American anti-Semitism this year. In other words, they're both having this conversation, and they're arguing that the supposition is that young Jews, and especially North American young Jews, are struggling to see Israel and the Holocaust and their history with the same lens as previous generations. And as Rabbi Weinberg points out, the answer to that, of course, is yes. Empirically, yes. It's just fact. We can't imagine a generation that didn't experience these things firsthand to have the same response and reaction to it as the generation that did. And especially as we get further and further away, right? As the generation of the Shoah passes away, as their children get older, and as the stories start to fade, inevitably, come a generation from now, 2 generations, 5 generations, 10 generations down the road, further and further removed, there is, of course, the inherent risk that we will think of the Shoah in the same way that we tend to think about the Spanish Inquisition. Terrible, horrible stories that are told once a year on Tisha B'Av, but a piece of archaic history. So the existential reality here is serious, and it needs to be acknowledged as such, and Rabbi Weinberg is not running away from it. So he draws attention to something really quite remarkable and unique that I actually was not familiar with. I'm not sure how much this is really adhered to in Israel, but he points out that actually the Shabbat that finds itself between Yom HaShoah and Yom HaZikaron and Yom HaAtzmaut later next week now has a special designation. It is a special Shabbat with its own terminology around it, and it's known as Shabbat Tekumah, which is the Shabbat ultimately of revival and restoration. It, Rabbi Weinberg says, represents the dramatic turn from the tragedy of the Holocaust to the realization of the dream of a Jewish state, echoing the ancient paradigm of disaster to renewal, and thus creating meaningful national and theological moments as we mark these modern events. And he then points to a teaching by a colleague, by Israeli Reform Rabbi Mordechai Rotem, who himself is a Sabra, native Israeli Reform rabbi, who suggests that it's not just this Shabbat that actually matters in this way, it's actually the whole period of time between Yom HaShoah and Yom HaZikaron and Yom HaAtzmaut next week. And he calls it, this is attention to this period of time, to some other example that we have in our Jewish practice in our calendar, which is the Aseret Yemei Teshuvah, the days of repentance that exist between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. And that they're not just any days. The idea is that when we begin our high holiday time together, we start the process really with Slichot before Rosh Hashanah, but Rosh Hashanah proper. And then as we leave Shul on Rosh Hashanah, we're meant to spend the next several days in deep contemplation, in thought, in self-reflection, and ultimately in a hopes towards growth, so that when we get to Yom Kippur, we have a different kind of mindset than in any other time of the year. So this Rabbi Rotem sort of says we need to sort of think of this period of time in a similar kind of way and call it something a little bit different, Shivat Yemei Te'udah, 7 days of bearing witness. In this he explains that during the 7 days of bearing witness, the nation of Israel needs to, as a community, examine themselves, check from year to year how much they are succeeding in fulfilling the destiny that has fallen to them, their mission, the legacy of death and the Holocaust, and the legacy of life and Independence Day, in which the nation of Israel engages in introspection and self-reflection about how they're measuring up and how they're measuring up to this destiny that stands before them, to build the future of the nation of Israel. And he says that these 7 days of bearing witness need to apply both to the individual and especially to society and its institutions, these public institutions. Now here, of course, he's speaking about Israelis specifically. He's talking about his own community, but really he's talking about all of us, right? All Jewish people all over the world, anybody who connects themselves to the legacy of the Shoah, to the beauty that is the state of Israel, to this remarkable period of time, it's incumbent upon us to treat it with the same kind of consideration, deep thought, reflection, and ultimate vision towards the future as we spend individually on a religious level thinking about the Aseret Yemei Teshuvah between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. So he continues with this thought, and Rabbi Weinberg comes back in here, and he says, in order to appreciate the magnitude of Israel today, one must pay homage to the struggles and suffering of yesterday. We are a people who remember, and our future is deeply informed by our past. Our modern and ancient calendars mandate us to remember a story before we can celebrate. We understand our place in history along a spectrum of past, present, and future, which provides context, nuance, and complexity in approaching our current reality. There is tension, obviously, and there has to be some amount of tension. And if you don't hear that tension, especially when you're talking to younger people, you're probably not actually spending a lot of time with younger people these days. Cantor Lauren and I can attest to the realities on the ground. It is not a simple matter of conversation, especially as it relates to topics like Israel and the Holocaust. So that tension is certainly there, but we don't do anything positive by running away from it, and we don't do anything positive by squashing it down. There needs to be something of a balance, and the best balance that we as Jews can provide is one of deep thought, of introspection, of inquiry, and of engaging with other people who maybe disagree with us fundamentally in one form or the other than to say that we share a love of our Jewish identity and our love of the state of Israel. Now, in the end, this is not the article that's going to give us the answer, so to speak, nor are these Shivat Yemei Te'udah as they are happening in Israel. But at the same time, I think that it's really quite instructive. I think I'm going to think about these next few days in a very different kind of way. And as I said, I've had the experience of being in Israel. I can carry those memories with me. I can picture in my mind what it's like to be there when those sirens go off, what it's like for my cousins, each of whom who've served in the army, who've lost friends, right? All of those people who matter, all of those stories that matter. But the question of what the legacy is and how it impacts the day-to-day experience of Israelis and ultimately the future of generations further and further away from these formative narrative stories, if we don't do some serious conversation, some serious reconciling, and some serious listening, both to ourselves and to others, then this tension is going to become more than tension. It eventually, like any tense piece of rope, it will eventually snap. And if we're not careful to acknowledge the tension and to do something to bring a little bit of that pressure off, and to provide these kinds of spaces and opportunities for, as I said, that deep kind of thinking and introspection, I worry for the tension that we are seeing, and I worry that we are actually closer to the snap than we may like to admit. So not to close on a negative note, Rabbi Weinberg comes back and he says as follows: thinking about the lament of one generation toward another leads to bigger questions. No, this generation does not know what it was like to go through the Holocaust and is growing up with much less of a sense of collective trauma. Can they empathize with those who have, and can those who live with trauma acknowledge the suffering and the experience of others? As we prepare to bow our heads in mourning for the high price so many paid for us to have a Jewish state, let us also exalt their memories and offer our gratitude for their ultimate sacrifice. He's speaking in this case of the Chayalim, of the soldiers of the state of Israel. But also make room in our hearts and minds to apply the lessons of that sacrifice, of strength and security, of imagination and dreaming, of empathy and care for others. And let us celebrate everything that has been created and forge on to create the next chapter. And he closes by wishing us all a Shabbat Tekuma Shalom. So, as I said, this is something that I wasn't even aware of happening in Israel. I don't know how widespread it is. It's certainly not anything I've heard about happening in the United States in this period of time. And there are some uniquely Israeli characteristics to these days, even as he says, we may connect ourselves to the story of the Shoah, either for those in the room who have personal connection to it, or those of us that grew up with a deep sense of the importance of remembering. And the same is true certainly of the state of Israel and its founding generation and the lives that were lost in fighting for what otherwise was not going to be given. These are all real stories that are embedded in us and ultimately are as much a part of us as the story we just finished reading in the Haggadah. But if we, again, don't acknowledge the fact that each generation is not going to respond to these stories in the same way, and if our response every single time that we interact with a younger person who challenges a narrative or who questions whether we are spending too much time thinking about the past and not enough time thinking about the present and the future, we may not like it, we may not agree with it, we may challenge it back, but we have to be very, very cautious to do what many of us are guilty of doing, which is just simply shutting down the conversation altogether, closing our ears to any conceivable argument to the contrary. And I think if we do that, as I said, that tension, which is palpable, anybody that has spent any time in a Hebrew school classroom, in a day school classroom, on a college campus, if you don't think that there are Jews, young Jewish people who are very much struggling with these narratives and these stories and this part of our history, I have a rude awakening for each and every one of us. And I hope, because I am ever the optimist, that nothing is definitive or set in stone. It only becomes that way when we become obstinate, when we become set so much in our ways that we can't conceive of a different path. In the end, the next generation are going to be the ones to carry this story forward, whether we like it or not. And how we relate to them and how we tell that story is going to define how that story is told from generation to generation. And the last thing that we want is to have a circumstance like what we have, as I said, with other tragedies in our history, which is to relegate them to the piece of history, right? To whispered narratives, to one day a year in which we think about these things. So let us all take some lesson from Rabbi Weinberg's teaching tonight, and to really take the next few days and to really think, what is the Shoah? What does that legacy mean to us as a people? What does it mean to us as individuals? And what is the state of Israel? And what are the sacrifices of the people who made it happen and continue to protect it and ultimately to serve it and ultimately to hope for a better day than what is current reality? There is a lot of thinking to be done. We have a few days to do it, and I hope that each of us will take that responsibility seriously. With that, I wish you all a Shabbat Shalom, and I'll invite Cantor Lauren back up to the bima. Before we recite Aleinu, we will, of course, mark the counting of the Omer as well. So I'll invite those in the room to rise in body or spirit, and we'll give the cantor just a moment to get set up again.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav u'tzivanu al sefirat Amen. Hayom 14 yom shehem shnei Shavuot Lamed.
We'll remain standing as we turn to page 586 at the very bottom of the page, Aleinu l'Shabbat. Aleinu l'Shabbat l'Adon hakol latet kedula liotzer breshit shelo asanu kegoye haratzot velo samanu kemishpechot ha'adama shelo sama chelkenu kahem vegor aleinu kechol hamonam v'anachnu korim u'mishtachavim u'modim Lifnei melech malchei hamlachim HaKadosh Baruch Hu. We're now on page 591. V'nehemar v'haya Adonai lemelech al kol haaretz Bayom hahu yeh Adonai echad U'shemo Echad. Invite those in mourning and those observing yahrzeit to remain standing. Everyone else may be seated at this time. We'll begin by thinking of those who've passed in our community in recent months. Dr. John Abdrikin, Faith Diskin, Linda Donath, Arlene Eber, Jay Fagan, Ellen Frank, Chaim Bear Greenwald, Arthur Grossman, Gerald Hirsch, Mark Joseph, Jane Beard Cass, Gertrude Katz, Deirdre Klein, Elaine Krotman, Leo Leibowitz, William Lipman, Audrey Lubo, Sandra Luongo, Morty Lynn, Jerry Monroe, Nancy Nagel, Harry Olstein, Harriet Roth, Jeannie Rubin, Howard Schreier, David Senft, Anita Sheldon, Alan Silver, Marlise Silverberg, Blanche Sklar, Rita Sandra Snyder, and Matthew Adam Zimmerman. We also mark the yahrzeits that occurred during the last week for Milton Axelrod, Stuart Lawrence Bell, Dora Field, Hugh France, William Grossman, Evelyn Katz, Hyman Cohens, Herman Morris, Randolph Scott Racklin, Ethel Sanders, Vera Shaps, Benjamin Schwab, Elizabeth Schwab, Herman Schwartz, Mo Slater, Samuel Slip, Aaron Spitzer, Morris Tepper, Morris Wolf, and Philip Zaslauer. In addition to the names we've mentioned, if anyone has additional names that they'd like to share, and we'll invite those in the room to rise in body or spirit as the mourners join together with me on page 598. Yitkadal v'yitkadash shemei Rabbah.
Amen.
Be'alma divrach yerutei v'yamlich malchutei b'chayechon u'v'yomechon u'v'chayei dechol Beit Yisrael b'agalau v'zban kariv v'imru Amen.
Amen.
Yehei Shemei Rabba Mevarach Le'alam U'Le'almei Almaya. Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitromam v'yitnaseh v'yithadar v'yit'aleh v'yithalal Shemei Dekudsha Berichu. Le'ela min kol birchata v'shirata tushbechata v'nechamata ta'amiran be'alma v'yimru Amen. Yehei Shalama Rabba min Shemaya v'chayim aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael v'yimru Amen.
Amen.
Oseh Shalom b'mromav hu ya'aseh Shalom. Aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael v'imru Amen.
Amen.
Zichronam livracha, may every one of their memories be for a blessing.
Amen.
Please be seated. Okay, Shabbat Shalom to everyone. A few important announcements. First, of course, to join us for Shabbat services tomorrow morning. A reminder, Shabbat morning services are streamed either on Zoom. You're welcome to join us on the Zoom itself, or streamed on our website, YouTube channel, or Facebook page. You're also welcome to join us for Torah study, which is beginning at noon. Speaking of Torah study, next Shabbat, we are excited to have our next Torah Women's Commentary Torah study, this time facilitated by a dear friend of ours, a former member, but reconnecting herself even after she has moved to Boston, Dr. Emily Kutash. She's going to be teaching on Parshat Kedoshim. So everyone, of course, is welcome next Shabbat as well. It's a great opportunity to learn with a truly great scholar. Just a reminder, we're going back in time a little bit to this coming week. As we mentioned, this Sunday is Israel Independence Day, Yom HaAtzmaut. We are going to participate along with a congregation that is in North Carolina, if I remember correctly, that's arranged for a virtual concert and tour of Jerusalem. That'll be starting at 1 o'clock, so you should have gotten the information from our e-blast, but if you have any questions, to let me or Eileen know, and we'll get you all set up for that. Reminder, upcoming this week, Nina Mitzvah will be meeting at 9 o'clock. No Nina Mitzvah. That's why I always look at you, Andrew. Oh, you 11:30 in person. Boy, we're slowly coming back to real life here. 11:30 in person. And on Zoom, if you feel more comfortable that way. We're very advanced. I love it. So again, 11:30. We'll tell Eileen so she can update it. My Heschel class will be meeting at 12 o'clock online as well. Hebrew School is in session at 3:30, and the Social Justice Committee will have its regular meeting at 5 o'clock. Wednesday, Hebrew School will meet at 3:30, and Friday is my regular class. We're switching it back from 9:15 to 9 o'clock. Welcome to join in on anything and everything. Now, next Friday night, next Shabbat, this is a bittersweet thing to say, really more bitter than sweet. But some of you may know, Cantor Lauren, fiance Aaron, are actually moving to Los Angeles next year to take part in a program that actually Lou and I did together as well on the LA campus of HUC JIR, which is to gain a master's in Jewish education in addition to their respective master's degree they'll get as rabbis and cantors. So we are losing Cantor Lauren to, and I'm going to say this, the worst coast. I'm a New Yorker through and through. But having lived through the experience of LA, she's getting her driver's license. She's truly
preparing herself. But we're not losing her right away. She's going to be with us actually through much of the summer. And one of her dear friends at school, Kevin McKenzie, is going to take over the position. And he is actually going to join us next week as an opportunity to get to know him. And Cantor Lauren and he are going to share some of the Bima and sing together. They sing beautifully together. He's going to be a wonderful fit for our community. And not least to say, my dear friend Neil and I, who've been interviewing cantors together since I got here, and Neil since long before I got here, we have had a remarkable series of successes over the years, and especially knowing that our beloved Lauren is the one that gave the thumbs up means a great deal to us. And I think we won't be just saying goodbye when we say goodbye. Something tells me we'll bring Lauren back over the years to be back with us again, because we just treasure your time with us. So, Lauren, we wish you the very best. We'll celebrate you properly when you guys leave. Aaron's actually leaving a little bit earlier. But next Shabbat is a great one to come to, either in person or to watch online. And let's make sure that we welcome Kevin to our community with open arms. Last thing, the May calendar e-blast should have had it in the most recent one that you received. A lot of things going on in May as we look towards summer. We're working very hard to put together a lot of great programming all up and down, and we're really looking forward to it. But certainly, you'll pay attention to it. You'll look at all the stuff that's going on. But we're really excited for May and everything to come from there. So with that, just one last thing. Building update, Neil? Okay, so Neil's making an impassioned, they can't hear you, so I'll relay it through he's making an impassioned speech for those that feel comfortable. If you can in your area, come in person next week so that we can really welcome Kevin. And those that are still more comfortable on the Zoom, Neil is not judging. He's just wanting as many people as we can to be here. And just in regular building updates, it's really going great, progress every day, and we really hope, again, we'll get a chance to start bringing people in to see the building. But if not, you can drive by it, you can see all the work that's being done from the outside. I just picked Eva up at the elementary school, so you get a real great angle of seeing it from the other side. It's an amazing thing, people. So we just got to keep our mind on the future, and it's something for us to really celebrate. So, with all of that, we're going to turn it back over to Cantor Lauren for a closing song for this evening, and then we'll do Kiddush, and we'll say Shabbat Shalom.
So we're going to end this evening with Eli, Eli, and the words, I believe, are found on page 653 in our Siddur, 653. I'm going to wait for a confirmation if that is correct.
That
Okay,
is
we got the thumbs up. It is on page 653.
Eli, Eli, שלא ייגמר לעולם, החול והים, וישרו של המים, ורקת שמיים, תפילת האדם, החול והים, וישרו של המים, ורקת שמיים, תפילת האדם. Oh God, my God, I pray that these things never end. The sand and the sea, the rush of the waters, the crash of the heavens, the prayer of the heart, the sand and the sea, the rush of the waters, the crash of the heavens, the prayer of the heart.
We'll now rise in body or spirit as we turn to page 123 for Kiddush. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam borei peri hagafen.
Amen.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'ratzavanu v'shabbat kodsho b'ahava u'b'ratzon inchilanu zikaron l'maaseh v'reishit ki hu yom techila l'mikrae kodesh זכר ליציאת מצרים, כי בנו בחרת, ואותנו קידשת מכל העמים, בשבת קודשך, באהבה וברצון, הנחלתנו. Baruch atah Adonai, Mekadesh HaShabbat. Amen.
L'chaim.
L'chaim, Shabbat Shalom. Shabbat Shalom to all of our friends watching at home. And may it be a beautiful weekend for you. Think deeply while you're doing that, enjoying the weekend and your time together. All right. Turn